All right, today I want to talk about how to regain direction when you're overwhelmed emotionally and cognitively. When every task that you have feels urgent and nothing feels clear, and you feel distracted, and you have brain fog, and even simple actions feel very hard to start. What I want to do is explore how, or rather, why your motivation disappears in this state, and how it's linked to a degraded attention, and how to rebuild your ability to act. Um, we'll draw from a few thinkers. Usually, I try to boil down the sources we draw from in these videos to like two or three people, ideally one person. But today, we're gonna draw from five or six ideas in the history of philosophy and psychology that give really, like, each of them give a kind of a different shape to why willpower tends to go down when you are overwhelmed, and then methods for recruiting willpower and generating willpower in these situations. Um, and so we'll look at these six thinkers, each of them offering a specific idea that can help you understand and correct what's happening when your system shuts down under load. So we're going to look at Roy Baumeister on decision fatigue, Barry Schwartz on overchoice and dissatisfaction, Martin Heidegger on being towards possibility, Donald Broadbent on limited cognitive channel capacity, um, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi on flow conditions, and then Simone Weil on attention as ethical clarity. And so each of these will be used directly to diagnose and to address a different layer of overwhelm. So, what exactly is the problem when you feel overwhelmed? And this is a very serious problem when you are in the midst of it because you feel completely blocked. And there's this exponentially escalating gap between the things that you need, the number of things that you need to do and the number of things that you're doing. The number of things you need to do starts going up rapidly, and the number of things you're doing frighteningly starts decreasing. Because when you're overwhelmed, it doesn't feel like you're stuck on a hard task. It feels like every task is potentially the wrong task. That's the problem. There's no entry point into moving the system forward. You might open your email and you feel dread, and then switch to your notes app, and then scroll, and then just close your laptop entirely, right? So this state that you're in, this is not laziness or procrastination or distraction. It's what Roy Baumeister, in his paper Decision Fatigue, depletes self-regulatory resources, calls so Roy Baumeister calls this decision fatigue, and this is the deterioration of willpower caused by the accumulation of unresolved choices. So the choices don't need to be high stakes, they just need to remain open, and each unfinished task becomes a background process, like an open browser tab, that drains your capacity to start the next task. And the result is this cognitive paralysis that's masked as busyness, and you feel exhausted, but you haven't done anything. So, what is the amplifier of this problem? The amplifier is that you have too many options. This is the problem. It's not that it's not that you have a willpower problem. It's not that the task is too hard. It's the number of open tasks that you have in front of you. This is the issue. So you've broadened your field of view to see this mountain of tasks that genuinely appears to be uncompletable. So Barry Schwartz, in his book The Paradox of Choice, demonstrated that when the number of perceived options increases, satisfaction decreases and action becomes harder to initiate. Not because choice is bad, but because too many options without clear trade offs lead to paralysis. So when you're overwhelmed, you're not choosing between good and bad. You're choosing between 12 decent options with no feedback loop to tell you which is the right one. And that requires like an advanced and really impractically complex decision making process to choose one thing. This is emotionally destabilizing. You second guess or you postpone, you start something you can't finish. This is the moment that people confused with burnout. But it's not output failure, it's selection failure. So, what is the deeper collapse here? The deeper collapse is the loss of projection into the future. So, here we draw on Martin Heidegger. Martin Heidegger, in Being in Time, his book Being in Time, he describes human action as rooted in what he calls being towards possibility. So we don't act because we're told to act. We act when the thing right in front of us feels meaningfully connected to who we are becoming. And when you're overwhelmed, that projection breaks. You're no longer moving towards anything. You're just scanning for the signal that doesn't arrive. And so the work that you're doing feels hollow. The task in front of you feels disconnected, out of place in the story you're living. Not because the work that you're doing itself is meaningless, but because you've lost your orientation about how this work advances the plot of your life. And this creates a specific emotional profile that you bring to that task. Frustration towards yourself at inaction, guilt for not caring, and then resentment towards the things that you usually love. And none of this is actually irrational. It's what it feels like when you're no longer living into a possibility, but reacting to your environment with no authorship. So sometimes we approach this specific problem by trying to zoom out and get a bigger picture, saying, okay, I just need to reorient myself. Feels like a very rational move. But zooming out actually typically makes it worse. Counterintuitively, zooming out actually typically makes it worse. So people in this state of being overwhelmed often try to fix it by, like, I'm going to get organized. Getting organized, I'm organizing my stuff, right? So they rewrite their task system and they restructure their Notion workspace and they build a new weekly planner, right? Sometimes this helps, but often this just adds volume. They've just created another task for themselves. And I get it, because there's like the chopping down the tree versus sharpening the axe, right? But this just adds volume. So Donald Broadbent, in his book Perception and Communication, he describes human cognition as a limited channel system. And the more computing signals you try to process, the less throughput you get on any of them. So you don't get actually smarter or stronger in your willpower when you zoom out. You just get flooded. You're already overloaded. And adding structure before selecting a task just introduces more layers that you have to then ignore. You don't need another plan. You need a visible finish line. And that sounds very counterintuitive, and that's very hard for planning-oriented people. Because they think, well, if I plan, I'll be able to do it better. If I plan, I'll be able to organize my vision and organize the race course and visualize how I get to the finish line. But what you're doing there is you're creating a long process to get to the finish line. The goal isn't to get organized. The goal isn't to have a plan. The goal is to be done. So you might push back on this and say, no, but I'm going to use the project management system. I'm going to use my new Notion workspace to get this stuff done. Here's an idea. Set this task of creating a new Notion workspace or project management system or task management system or planner or planning system. Set that task as a reward for finishing a specific set of urgent tasks, so that when those are done, you have the emotional bandwidth, the time space to do this. So what's the actual correction? So the correction is one point, not all paths. So we have Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi in Flow. He defines optimal attention as requiring three things. Number one, a clear, bounded task. Number two, immediate feedback. And number three, a challenge matched to current ability. So in other words, the brain re-engages when it can close a loop. To enter motion under overwhelm, or rather even to re-enter motion under overwhelm. The rule is very simple. Shrink the scope of your vision until closure is possible. So pick one task. right? And this actually comes down to task architecture. So you pick one task, not the most strategic task, just the most finishable task, and you finish it. This is like the Dave Ramsey snowball method of time. Okay, so pick one task, and that finishable task, finish it, then assess again. Don't reflect, assess. The mistake is assuming you'll feel ready at some point. You will never feel ready to work. You will never feel ready to take on this mountain. You'll always feel like this is a mountain. You're going to have to move through that resistance once. Maybe you'll have to do it again, but for now, it's just once. Again, it's about narrowing that field of vision. So I'm not, it's like the further up you look, right, the higher the angle of your vision, the more the higher volume the collection of items is within your plane of view. But if you narrow your task and just look at like the pavement in front of you until the point where you just see one task, right? That's what makes readiness possible, is that you actually narrow your plane of view. So there is this pressure that you have now that you have to deal with when you narrow your plane of view, which is the moral pressure to avoid. So there's another layer here, which is that impulse to scroll and to procrastinate and to distract yourself. And it doesn't feel good, but it feels better than choosing something and failing at the thing you choose. So Simone Weil in Gravity and Grace argues that true attention is not focus. It's the refusal to flee from what is present, even when it's painful. And it is moral, not just mental. So you escape into distraction, not because you're weak, but because the task in front of you feels too ambiguous to engage cleanly. So Weil reframes action not as discipline, but as ethical willingness to stay put and face one task without abandoning it for something that's easier to metabolize. And that's the real pivot. That you're not trying to do everything. You're learning how to stay inside one thing long enough for traction to return. So I want to give you a little practical application, which is a practical restart method. So if you are overwhelmed, how do you integrate all these ideas? Here's how. You do this little 4-step thing, little 4-step ritual that will reset you to a baseline where you're incorporating all of these principles, okay? So when you're overwhelmed, number 1, you mute everything. Your brain is past the limit. You can't outthink noise. First step is to mute all input. The second is to choose one task with a single finish line. So you're going to send an invoice. You're going to clean the table. You're going to answer an email. Doesn't matter what it is, but you choose one task with one finish line. Number 3, work until it's done. No reflection allowed, no distraction, no task switching. Don't plan, don't prioritize, just complete the task. And after that, step 4 is you assess. Do I know what matters now? If not, repeat this step. And if yes, move up a layer in your task system. Okay, so this is how you do it. You mute, you choose a task, you work until the task is done, and then you assess. What blocks people, what gets people stuck in overwhelm is they put number 4 first. They assess, and they're like, okay, I'm gonna assess. No, you mute, you choose, you execute, you finish, and then you assess. And then, do I know what matters? Do I know how to do the next thing? If not, choose another thing to do and execute that thing, right? And this process will show you the way to complete everything. So the way to find out how to overcome the tasks that are giving you overwhelm, do the tasks. And in doing so, the way will reveal itself to you. The fallacy that keeps people stuck in overwhelm is that they can think their way through the problem beforehand. But the problem is what they're doing is they're digging themselves into a hole where they are. So, to sum all this up, if you are feeling overwhelmed, you are not, you don't have a broken brain. You may not even have a broken system. You're just unsorted. So overwhelm feels like a very personal quality. Like there's something wrong with me. It feels like a failure of motivation or a failure of care, a failure of priorities, a failure of character, but it's not those things. So overwhelm, it's what happens when the environment exceeds your system's sorting capacity and you keep trying to process everything at once. And fixing it means shrinking your field, choosing one meaningful anchor, and letting completion, not clarity, rebuild that momentum. This isn't a mindset, it's bandwidth. This is not about your identity. It's selection, task selection under constraint is the solution to overwhelm, not identity work. Sometimes identity work is important. Sometimes mindset work is important. That's the big fallacy here. When you're overwhelmed, not about your mindset, not about your identity. It's about task selection. It's about field of vision. The system doesn't restart when you understand it. The system restarts when you choose one thing and finish it, even if it's small, especially if it's small. Let that be enough, then move again.